Good morning, everyone, and Shabbat Shalom. Our Torah portion for this week is Parshat Shoftim, which is Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 18 through chapter 21, verse 9. And there's a lot of really rich, incredible learning in this Parsha. We get the infamous verse, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdof, justice, justice you shall pursue. We'll talk about that in just a little while. But let me give you just a little bit of a summary and overview of our Torah portion. Shoftim deals with the primary arms of authority in biblical Israel. So you have judges, monarchs, priests, and prophets. The Israelites are to appoint magistrates and judges in every one of their settlements, and these are commanded to show impartiality towards all cases and petitioners, being scrupulous to avoid any bribes. And again, we get justice, justice you shall pursue. That was to guide their deliberations and their procedures. There were 3 prohibited religious practices: setting up a pagan wooden altar, an Asherah, sacrificing an animal with a mum. A mum is a blemish, so you couldn't sacrifice an animal that was blemished, or allowing an apostate to remain in your midst. And so these 3 prohibited religious practices interrupt our discussion of judges in the Torah portion this week, perhaps to indicate the importance of serving God properly as the cornerstone to true justice. That may be, in fact, the connection and why those 3 prohibitions are in there. The Torah provides a system of referral from a local court to a high court to handle cases that the local court really can't decide. And this biblical grant of authority to the magistrate in charge at the time, and the mandate to observe scrupulously all their instructions so that we must not deviate from their verdict. This forms the basis for rabbinic authority to this very day. And in fact, many will say that the Talmud, the Jewish system of law, serves as the foundation for the American legal jurisprudence system in general. The Israelites are permitted to establish a monarchy as they desire, but Moses places limits on the king's authority and power. The only responsibility that Deuteronomy explicitly assigns the king is to write and study a copy of the Torah. That's it. So clearly, this monarchy was to be under the authority of the law and answerable to it. The king's wealth, stables, and harem were all limited so that, quote, he will not act haughtily towards his fellows or deviate from the Torah. Interesting. The section dealing with the clergy establishes that the Kohanim, the priests, are to receive the offerings and sacrifices from which they are to support themselves. The Torah then lists the specific portions they may rightfully claim. The Torah then lists where in Israel, or a Levite, no matter where in Israel he dwells, can also claim the right to serve in the temple. And the prophet looms large in Deuteronomy and in the Deuteronomic vision. And the book of Deuteronomy itself seeks to strengthen the authority and scope of the prophets. Alone, all the biblical authorities, the prophet's basis is in fact a quotation from God rather than Moses' own words. So that's a big distinction. The prophet is the heir to Moses himself. And the Torah portion restates the laws of the cities of asylum and establishes the law regarding intentional murder and discusses the inviolability of boundaries and the law requiring not less than 2 witnesses. And then finally in chapter 20 of our Parsha, we get the laws of just warfare established, limiting the extent to which military can strike against civilians who may be drafted and the treatment of surrounding agriculture. And then finally, chapter 21 deals with a case of unsolved murder. So this is the overview of Parshat Shoftim, again, chock full of really important and still quite timely legislation, if you will. So let's dive in. We'll begin with a blessing over Torah. I'll chant some of the Torah, and then we'll share a few drashot, a few sort of hidden meanings, if you will, to pull from the Torah portion this week. Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach, Baruch Adonai hamvorach le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol hamim, V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol she'arecha asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha lishvatecha v'shaftu et ha'am mishpat tzedek lo tate mishpat lo takir panim Velo tikach shochad ki ha-shochad ye'aver enei hachamim v'salef divrei tzadikim tzedek tzedek tirdof leman tichiyeh v'yarashta et haaretz asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach Lo tita lecha ashera kol eitz etzel mizbeach Adonai Elohecha asher ta'aseh lach Belo takim lecha matzeva asher sanei Adonai Elohecha Lo tizbach l'Adonai Elohecha shor vaseh Asher yevo mum kol davara ki to'avat Adonai Elohecha hu. You shall appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes in all the settlements that your God Adonai is giving you, and they shall govern the people with due justice. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall show no partiality. You shall not take bribes. For bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the just. Justice, justice shall you pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that your God is giving you. You shall not set up a sacred post, any kind of pole beside the altar of your God Adonai that you may make, or erect a stone pillar, for such your God Adonai detests. You shall not sacrifice to your God Adonai an ox or sheep that has any defect of a serious kind, for that is abhorrent to your God. And now blessing after the Torah reading. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So I came upon a drasha, interpretation of Parshat Shoftim that I had never seen before, and I thought was just really interesting food for thought. I'd love to share it with you. So Rabbi Bradley Artson shares this interpretation, and he says that, we are justly proud of the ability of our economy to provide so many basics and so much comfort to our own people and to those around the world. The power of the American enterprise, with its abundance and its energy, is remarkable by any standard. What used to be affordable only for nobility and the wealthy is now really within the reach of the average American. We are all familiar with the popular adage, you can never be too rich or too thin. Well, we've learned, of course, that indeed you can be too thin. We read of and perhaps ourselves know those who are anorexic in our own society, and as photographs of starving children flood our newspapers and television shows, we also see that for many of the world's people, being too thin is in fact a dangerous part of the human condition. Okay, but what about our wealth, Rabbi Artson asks. Is it possible to be too wealthy? Well, imagine the wonderful activities and comforts that you could buy with more money. A luxurious mansion, perhaps a pied-à-terre in some exotic part of the world, or expensive art or magnificent jewelry. Possibilities are enticing and endless. Money may not be able to buy happiness, but it might well buy the things that buy happiness. Well, our Torah portion relates an example of too much wealth in ancient Israel. The king. The Torah says of the king, He shall not keep many horses or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses. And he shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray, nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess. So apparently it is possible to possess too much silver and gold. God's concern is that the king will become the captive of his wealth, that all those possessions will alter his perspective and determine his agenda. Wonder what it must be like to have a really obscenely wealthy leader. In striking contrast to the rest of the world, ancient Israel was a notoriously democratic society. After leaving Egypt, the Israelite slaves did not establish a new state. Instead, they founded a system of laws that applied equally to every member of society. No nobility, no monarchy could alter the egalitarian nature of biblical Israel. In the eyes of God, all were equal. In the eyes of society, the only sovereign was God. After 200 years of this democracy, the people longed for a king to rule over them so they could be, quote unquote, like all the other nations. That repudiation of Jewish distinctiveness was the death knell for the sacred way that had sustained our people. The law and the Torah accurately summarized what happened with Israel's kings. Obsessed with adding more palaces, more slaves, more wives, and more wealth, they led the nation away from the moral rigor and passion for justice that characterizes the Torah. And instead of focusing on wealth, the Torah urges another form of responsibility for the king. Here's what it says. When he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. Let it remain with him, and let him read in it all his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching as well as these laws. Thus he will not act haughtily towards his fellows, or deviate from the instruction to the right or to the left. Rather than focusing on his wealth, the king is commanded to focus on the Torah. By reading it repeatedly, he will retain a perspective about what is of eternal worth and what is merely a tool for better living. When the ultimate focus in life is money and the things that money can buy, the feelings of other people are of little esteem, and the values of our tradition seem largely irrelevant. Ironically, when wealth is the highest goal, no amount of money is enough. Insatiable demand can never be satisfied. But if money and comfort are recognized for what they are, useful tools to allow us to focus on other things, character, compassion, justice, and spirit, then it becomes possible to experience contentment. One can own enough and enjoy sufficient income to be able to attend to the needs of others and one's own morality. More than that, the Torah says, is too much. Who is rich? Asks the Mishnah. Ezehu Yashir. Hasameach bechelko, the one who is happy with what he has. So this Shabbat, let us consider just how rich we already are and just how content. So moving to our Haftorah for this Shabbat, on this fourth Shabbat post Tisha B'Av, the destruction of the temple, we read the fourth prophecy of the Sheva Denechemta, the 7 Haftorahs of consolation. And there will be 3 more after this, all from 2nd Isaiah. And the last one is recited on the Shabbat just before Rosh Hashanah. And so the theme of consolation, rather than the connection between the Torah portion and something happening in the Haftorah, is the reason for the selection this week. So it's selected because it's meant to comfort us as we do this work of soul searching and soul digging and sort of, the work of really honestly assessing our faults leading up to the holy days. And so the setting of the Torah, of the Haftorah portion from Isaiah this week, is that the people are in exile in Babylonia and they have suffered grievously. But, however, with the expected victory of the Persians over the Babylonians, they had high hopes that their fortunes would be reversed and their present unhappy fate would be turned into glorious happiness. So let's read a little bit together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar b'nbiim tovim, beratzah v'divrehem hane'emarim be'emet, Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah uv Moshe avdo uv Yisrael amo uv'nviei ha'emet v'tzedek. Anochi, Anochi, hu menachemchem, mi'at v'tir'i me'enosh yamut, umi bein adam chatzir yinaten, v'tishkach Adonai oseshecha, Note Shemaim v'yosed aretz v'tifached tamid kol hayom mipnei chamat hametzik kasher konen lehashchit ve'ayeh chamat hametzik mi hartzoe lahipateach v'lo yamut lashachat v'lo yechsar lachmo v'anochi Adonai Elohecha roga hayam v'yehemu gelav Adonai Tzavaot Shamo. I am the one who comforts you. What is wrong with you that you are afraid of mortals, of human beings who become like grass, that you forget the eternal your Maker who spread out the heavens and established the earth? All day long you are in terror of the fury of an oppressor, intent on your destruction. Yet where is the oppressor's fury? Neither death nor the grave for you who bend low. You shall be free and lack nothing. For I am the eternal your God. I stir up the sea and make its waves roar. God of heaven's hosts is my name.
If you're still watching, here's what I got for you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzur kol haolamim tzadik b'kol hadorot ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer ve'oseh ha'meraber u'mekayim shechol devarav emet b'tzedek al ha'torah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al ha'nevi'im ve'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu likdusha v'limnucha lekavod u'tifaret al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach umivarachim otach yitbarach shimcha befi kol chai tamid leolam ba'ed baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabbat. Shabbat shalom.